Documents seen by the BBC show the government knew the HS2 rail project was over budget 3 years ago. The documents were written in 2016 before MPs had signed off the first phase of the project, which raises questions over whether Parliament was given the whole picture. Our transport correspondent Tom Burridge has this exclusive report.
Until very recently, we were told by ministers and bosses at HS2 that the programme to build the new high-speed railway was on budget and on time.
There is only one budget for HS2, and it is £55.7 billion.
But BBC News has obtained documents which show that at least 3 years ago, the government knew that wasn't the case. The evidence we've got hold of suggests you, the taxpayer who's funding it, didn't have the full picture. This letter was sent in May 2016 to the then Chancellor, George Osborne. In it, the Transport Secretary at the time, Patrick McLaughlin, admits that the first stretch of the railway, linking Birmingham to London, was already over budget by nearly £1 billion. He also proposes opening the railway a year late to try and save money. A former HS2 director told me the £1 billion overspend was a conservative estimate, and internally teams knew it was a lot higher. Another former HS2 director, Doug Thornton, says he often told government that the budget wasn't realistic.
I was briefing personally director at the Department of Transport, head of property at the Department of Transport, and the Department of Transport's project representative team. So at that level, the department knew.
And all of these warnings, crucially, before the first phase of HS2 had been signed off by Parliament. As protesters occupy fields and footpaths next to a construction site, people will ask whether MPs were misled. For all the opposition, HS2 does have strong support. But the evidence we've seen not only raises questions about whether this programme is value for money, but about transparency and trust. And for the first time, this former HS2 manager is speaking out. Andrew Bruce's job was to work out how much all of the land and property needed to build the first phase of the railway would cost. In the previous estimate, some properties had ridiculous values.
So you've got a school and the land around it for £782.45.
Yes.
He improved the data and discovered that aspect of the project would need an extra £2 billion. But he says HS2 sacked him just half an hour before he was due to present that uncomfortable truth to the Department for Transport.
I think Parliament was misled. I think we're now having to spend far more public taxpayers' money on HS2 than Parliament thought was going to be required. HS2 knew that. They knew it months, if not years before giving those figures to Parliament, and yet they went ahead and gave figures they knew to be vastly underestimated.
HS2 Limited said it did not recognise Andrew Bruce's claims. It strongly rejects the idea that a more accurate costing for land and property needed to build the railway was covered up. The National Audit Office investigated these allegations last year and cleared HS2 of any wrongdoing. HS2 said it also faced extensive scrutiny from parliamentary committees. The Department for Transport said, like in any major complex programme, delivery plans evolve over time. But with the team appointed by the government to review the scheme set to begin their work tomorrow, it's hard to say how High Speed 2 will evolve in the coming weeks.
Well, Tom is here with me now. This is all very disturbing. Where does it actually leave the HS2 project?
Well, I think the scheme is shrouded in uncertainty. We now know that HS2 is way over budget, and that's why the government's commissioned this review to establish the true cost, lay out all the facts, and then decide how to proceed or not, it says. But I think what we've revealed today is not really so much about the pros and cons about whether, building a high-speed railway linking northern and southern England. It's more about how this programme has been handled in the past, the amount of transparency. And I think the key question is, when there was pretty compelling evidence that the £56 billion budget of taxpayers' money probably wasn't realistic, was the wool pulled over our eyes? I think it will put pressure on the government going forward to ensure that things are more transparent, that potentially the project is handled better, I guess, in the future. We're expecting the new Transport Secretary, Grant Shapps, to update Parliament on HS2, the programme, next week. And that commission, that review that he's commissioned, should report back by the end of the year.